Hey, I'm Courtney Waterman, your tutor. Lover of anime, manga, and math. And you just tuned into another session of Tutor Me Sempai. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're jumping into a 5th grade topic, dividing decimals. Now, if you're new to my channel, I will put in time codes in for this video in the description box below, so use that to skip ahead to whatever part of the video you think is most interesting. If you have any questions about what you see here today or even your own homework, remember you can always put it in the comment box below or visit me on my Facebook page at Tutor Me Sempai and tell me all about it there. When you find this video helpful, remember to leave a like. It really helps get more eyes on this channel by letting YouTube know that this video provided you some value and could potentially do that for someone else. And while you're at it, make sure you hit the notification bell, smash the subscribe button, and share this video with a friend. Well, without further ado, let's jump straight into dividing these decimals. If you've been following me for the past couple of weeks, you've seen how I've shown you, if you know how to do some basic math, we can actually manipulate what we know into something we potentially didn't know. And whether that was adding and subtracting decimals or multiplying decimals, it was very easy to bridge that gap. We're going to do something similar for dividing decimals today. So if you know how to do something, I'm going to show you what that is. I'm going to show you how you can take that and divide decimals. And you might have already guessed it based on my previous 2 videos. Now, if you hadn't seen my previous 2 videos on adding and subtracting decimals and multiplying decimals using basic stuff that you already knew, then I'll put it up here and you can click that at any time. So to start this video off, I want to let you know that there's a few things that you need to know before we get started with dividing decimals. So the first thing you want to know is going to be the components of your division. Now, what do I mean by components of division? That's going to be your divisor and your dividend. Now, if you don't know what a divisor and a dividend is, don't worry. Your divisor is what's going to be outside of your division sign. So if you have something like 2 and a 4 like this, outside is going to be your divisor. Inside is your dividend. So divisor, dividend. So the first thing you're going to need to know is going to be just your basic components. And yes, we have a quotient up here, but that's not what's going to be super important for this purpose right now. We just want to kind of focus on your divisor and your dividend. If you know those two, the second thing you need to know is how to divide. If you don't know how to actually divide, that's going to make dividing decimals a little bit more tricky. So if you don't know how to do that, check out my video on how to divide using decimals, which is different from this video because we're going to take it a step further. So the second thing is knowing how to divide. Now, if you're very familiar with division, especially long division using remainders, that's not going to actually get you this far. We need to know how to use decimals in our division, our long division using decimals. So please, if you hadn't seen that, check that first video out because it's not going to be directly this, but it's the first step. You got to get familiar with seeing decimals within that division sign. Once you have that, you'll see that this is going to be pretty much the same thing with one little tweak, which has been pretty characteristic of the past 2 videos. Using something you do know, which in this case, knowing how to divide using decimals, to find out something you don't know, knowing how to divide decimals. Now that we talked about the things to know before you get started, let's cover what steps we're going to need. Let's say we have a question like this, in which there's decimals both inside and outside of our division. This is slightly different from using decimals because that was mainly having decimals within your division sign here. So the inside had a decimal, but the outside didn't. Now I'm going to show you what happens when you have a decimal on the outside. And whether you have a decimal inside or not, these steps are going to apply. Whenever you're dividing by that decimal, you need to know what steps you're going to need to do in order to make that work. And remember, when we talked about the inside and outside, we're talking about the divisor and the dividend. So making sure you know your components is going to be the first part. So the first step is going to be identify a divisor. Since you already know what the divisor is, because remember we talked about things you should know before you get started, this is going to be a step that you can potentially skip later on, but I just want to give you the steps that you're going to need just to bring you through the entire process. You can cut out the necessary steps when you get more familiar, but for right now, I want to list them all out. So identify what your divisor is. Don't get confused thinking that your divisor is your dividend. So we have to start with our divisor. This is our focus, our divisor. After we've identified the divisor, we want to see, is it a decimal? If it is a decimal, then we have our step 2. Our step 2 is to make it into a whole number. We do not want to do any long division with a divisor that's a decimal. So we want to change it into a whole number. So here we have 2.5. In order to make that into a whole number, we're going to need to move this decimal place. And we're going to move it to the right. So it's going to end up going over here. So 2.5 now turns into 25. So we've changed our divisor into a whole number by moving the decimal. The decimal's over here now. And you don't have to write that decimal. It's fine if you do. But it's important to know that we've moved it one space over here to make our whole number. You're not always going to move it just one space. You could have multiple decimal places, and therefore you're going to have to move it more spaces. But the key is to make it into a whole number. After you've fulfilled step 2, step 3 is to replicate the same steps inside for your dividend. So we're going to move it over the same amount of spaces that we did our divisor. So for this dividend here, we're going to move it over one space. So this becomes, instead of 5.0, 50. And you see, I'm putting the decimal there just to kind of reiterate that we've only moved it over one, and I didn't just erase the decimal. You're just moving it over one spot. After you've done steps 2 and 3 to manipulate not only your divisor but your dividend as well, all you have to do is divide like you normally would. Hence why knowing how to divide using decimals is important. In this case, we have 2 whole numbers, so it doesn't really matter. This is just going to be an answer of 2. However, that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you will have a decimal. But your fourth and last step, is to be able to divide. Just divide as you normally would. So once again, your steps are going to be identify your divisor. You want to start there. You don't want to start with your dividend. Although you will manipulate your dividend, you have to manipulate it according to what you did for your divisor. So identify your divisor, then change the divisor into a whole number. We're going to shift it over as many spaces as we need in order to get a whole number. Now, whatever you did for the outside, you have to do for the inside. The same exact steps. So if you moved over one space outside, you move over one space inside. Move over 2 spaces outside, move over 2 spaces inside. It doesn't matter how many times you did it, you have to replicate the same exact steps. So move the decimal over the same spaces as you did for your divisor for your dividend. After you've done steps 2 and 3, just divide. And whatever you get for your answer, that is your answer for that question. Let's look at a quick example and then talk about why these steps work. So make sure you stay tuned to after this example, because we're not just moving this over randomly just because we want to. I'm going to show you exactly why it works, but let's see an actual example on how it works to see all of these steps play out. Here we have some division. 4.84 divided by 1.6. So we're going to rewrite this in our long division form with our divisor outside, which is 1.6, and our dividend inside, which is 4.84. So we're going to follow these steps. Identify the divisor. So we know what the divisor is. This is our divisor. This is our focus point, our first point of entry here, our divisor. Now we're going to make the divisor a whole number. And to do that, we're going to move it over one space. So this 1.6 turns into a 16. So I'm going to change that to a 16. Now I'm going to just rewrite that because I don't want to use up all my space, but make sure you're taking your steps as necessary, writing out everything so you don't get lost. Now that we've done steps 1 and 2, we have to move into step 3, which is move the decimal place the same number of spots inside for your dividend. So we did it 1, so we're going to move it over one space. And you notice that we still have one more space, but it doesn't matter. We only moved over once here, so we're only moving over once here. So this is going to be, instead of 4.84, it's going to be 48.4. So now we've done step 3. Now we have our last step, divide as normal. And in my previous video on how to divide using decimals, I said, hey, wherever your decimal is, just put it up top. You don't want to forget that. So I just make that My thing, just so I don't forget it, is something easy, quick, and you don't even have to think about it. This is where your decimal is going to be in your quotient, your answer. So just put it there just to have it there in case you happen to run out of time and you might miss a step. You don't want to do all that work and get the wrong answer. So just quickly put your decimal there. It's going to be right on top where your decimal is inside for your dividend. Now we divide as normal. 16 doesn't go into 4, but it does go into 48. And it goes into 48 3 times. And we do a 16 times 3, and we get exactly 48. So we have a 0 here, and we're going to bring down this 4. 16 doesn't go into 4, so we put a 0 here. 0 times 16 gives us that 0 there. And we're going to subtract 4. Now, we're going to add a 0 because it doesn't matter how many times you're adding 0 behind the decimal. It doesn't change the value. Next, we're going to pull this 0 all the way down. Now we have 16 going into 40, and that's going to be 2 times. 2 times 16 gives us a 32, and we have an 8 left over. We're going to add another 0, bring that all the way down, and now we have 80. 16 goes into 80 5 times. 5 times 16 is going to be exactly 80. So we have nothing else here. No more zeros need to be added down because we have nothing left. So our answer for this question is going to be 3.025. 4.84 divided by 1.6 is going to be 3.025. Now to slightly pull back the curtain on this magic trick, we're going to talk about why moving the decimal for the divisor is even a viable thing to do. Why does this work? Well, it's very simple. This works because we're not just moving the decimal. If you know about moving your decimal places, what are you actually doing? You're multiplying by a power of 10. So if you have 2.5, if I multiply that by 10, that's going to be 25, right? We moved it over one space because we're multiplying by a power of 10. If I was to multiply this by 100, we move it over 2 spaces, right? So we end up getting 250. Whenever you're moving your decimal to the left or the right, you're either going to be multiplying or dividing by 10. So that is why it works. However, it works only because you're consistent with it. Whatever you do to the inside, you have to do to the outside. Think about it that way. You're consistent. If you just move the divisor, you wouldn't get the right answer. Hence why it is very important that whatever you do to the inside, you have to do to the outside. Don't skip that step. Let's say you had 400 and you want to divide that by 2. Now you know 400 divided by 2 is going to be 200. However, if you were to move the decimal, let's say this decimal that is understood to be after that 2, and move it over one space, that then becomes 400 divided by 20. And that is only 20. So you see, if you don't do the inside and the outside, you're going to have a rough time. You're not going to get the same answer here. Since you changed your question, you're going to get a very different answer, thus get the wrong thing for whatever you're doing, homework or test. So if you do the inside and the outside, so not only that 2, but the 400 as well, this becomes 4,000 divided by 20, and now you're back at 200. So this is wrong. Whatever you do to the outside, do to the inside, being consistent. That helps you get the same answer, although it looks very different. All you're doing is moving the decimal place and multiplying by a power of 10 to do so. So I hope you're able to follow on today's examples, and I hope you see that dividing by decimals is very similar to dividing using decimals, as long as you remember to move your divisor over, making it a whole number, and whatever you do to the outside, you have to do to the inside. Keep it consistent. That is the key. Consistency. If you have any questions, remember, put them in the comment box below or visit me on Facebook at Tutor Me Sempai and tell me about your homework there as well. If you haven't done so already, remember to hit that like button. It really helps YouTube know that this video was helpful and it could potentially help someone else. So sharing is caring, and you can do so very easily by hitting that like button. And if you want to do a little bit more to help out, make sure you hit that notification bell, smash the subscribe button, and share this video with a friend. Well, that's all the time I have for today. I'm really hoping this helped with your homework, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Courtney, and this is another session of Tutor Me Sempai.
Bye.